Howdy. How's first day of Sundance treating you? Yay, I like to hear that. I am Dana Harris. I am the editor-in-chief of IndieWire, and welcome to our conversation series. And we have a really awesome one for kickoff. This is The Little Hours, and I'd like to bring out the cast and director, Dave Franco, Molly Shannon, Jemima Kirk, Kate Micucci, come on, Alison, Brie, and director Jeff Baena.
Okay, fine. I'll be dead soon. Take it away. No.
So the film is just premiered, but I want to let you know I've been kind of collecting notes as I've been talking to people in the hours since, in terms of what they've been saying about it, and among them it's like the fact it's hilarious. That's a given. But the thing what's really interesting to me is the references they have. They've been talking about Monty Python. They've been talking about Mel Brooks, The Princess Bride. Sequel has already come up. And my favorite, Nunsploitation. And so, but before we get into any of that, I want to talk about another reference, which is the Decameron. And how the hell did you get from the Decameron to this? And you should probably give people just a brief history lesson in terms of what the Decameron's all about. And you guys, and there's one, I know we're one mic short.
Yeah, so just to give you a little background. I went to NYU for film school, and I took a bunch of weird classes as electives through the Gallatin program, which is, I don't know, it's like sort of like, they have like really weird ass classes. And so one of them was called Sexual Transgression in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. Took some other things like Harmony of the Spheres, Arabian Nights, some other stuff. So I got a minor in medieval Renaissance studies without trying. And so I studied the Decameron in Sexual Transgression in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. And I just was so drawn to the story. The basic setup is it was written in 1350, and there's 10 people, and they're trying to hide out from the plague. And for 10 nights, they each tell a story. So it's 100 anthological stories. They're not connected at all. They're all like 2 or 3 pages long, and they're historical. And there's one main story that I kind of took as the basis for this movie, and then like 3 or 4 little details from other stories that I kind of added to the mix. But yeah, I was always just sort of drawn to that story for years, and it just kind of popped up, and I decided to make it.
So tell the audience what the film is about, because most of them won't have seen it.
Okay, so the film is about a convent in medieval Tuscany. Molly is the Mother Superior. Aubrey, Kate, and Alison are nuns, and John C. Reilly is the priest who runs it. And Dave plays a servant who works for Nick Offerman and Lauren Weedman in a castle not too far away. And he is sleeping with Nick Offerman's wife and gets caught and has to go on the run and hides out in this convent, and it just gets crazy.
This sounds like what people did before we had TMZ. So in terms of like how much of this was script and how much of this was improv? I mean, you've got a cast here who is obviously well versed in comedy, and so how much what was the give and take on that?
Well, I wrote like a 28-page outline, and we sort of based it off of that. And I mean, a lot of it was improvised. I mean, the majority of the improvisation came through the dialogue. The story was always pretty, clear cut. And yeah, I mean, I love these people, and I love their minds and what they're capable of. And I think when I'm trying to craft these movies, I try not to make it a stretch for actors. I try to kind of put something that is almost like who they are as a character in a situation that they would never be in, and then they sort of respond to it somewhat authentically, hopefully. And so I just, I've been a writer for like 12 or 14 years or whatever it is, and I just got to a place where, trying to get actors to say lines as the priority versus having an actor sort of inhabit the role sort of felt like not as fresh to me. So I try to come up with a way to, make it feel more alive.
I'd never done anything. Oh wait, girls, we do a similar thing, but except there is a script and then you deviate a little. But this was really like, here's the situation, go ahead. And then there was some things we had to stick to. But what I noticed was like when I think of improv, I'm thinking, oh, we can just like go crazy and do whatever we want. But it was actually funnier when you were like, just say that and just leave it at that. And that's because that's what's happening. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, that is so much funnier than my like, tripping or whatever I wanted to do. Like, oh.
It's
So,
true.
yeah.
There was like it's real minimalist quality, I feel like, to everything that we were doing. There was a 20-page outline. It was a very collaborative process with the dialogue, although Jeff had a lot of very clear ideas about what we should say in certain scenes. But this was not, even when we talk about improv in this movie, except for maybe Nick Offerman and Lord Weedman, who go on some runs, and maybe everything coming out of Offerman's mouth is like just coming straight out of his head. But
For us, he's like, keep it simple.
yeah, the rest of the time he's like, say much less. It was much easier to tell the story with less. It wasn't like when you think of improv in a movie and everyone's just like coming up with the funniest alt and just trying to top the next thing, and it's like constant laughter. It was
Every
all
line was
taken very
for the story, was just
seriously,
to
and we were
explain the
all-
story. Yeah.
And mostly it was like we were streamlining and cutting. The improv came out of like, maybe I'll say none of that and just leave, That's what would happen.
All that being said, though, it was still terrifying going into something where it was like, all right, this movie takes place 600 years ago, and you have to just kind of come up with what you're going to say. And so we had a lot of talks with Jeff about, like, do you want us to know the jargon, or kind of the slang they used during that time? And he was like, no, just keep it simple. It's about the relationships. It's not about
And to speak to that, there were a lot of conversations, I feel like, about the way we speak in the movie, because it's set in the 1300s, but we speak in a contemporary manner. But I mean, when you watch it, I feel like that's the takeaway. But truly, we did have very specific perimeters when we were shooting it that you didn't want us saying, you guys. It was like we were meant to speak really contemporarily, but we had these
You didn't
very
want you guys,
specific
but we could say
parameters.
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, totally is a word. Yeah, I mean, the logic was, imagine you're watching a documentary of something that took place in 1347. People aren't going to talk like, thou art, methinks, that kind of stuff, because first of all, it's Italian, so they don't speak like an old English way. And like another thing that I also wanted to do is make sure that, because part of what attracted me to this to begin with was it's so relatable and so human and so funny and so timeless. And I feel like if you kind of have those buffers, like if you watch Game of Thrones and everyone has like a British accent, but where are they? So like, why are they British? So, and like, there's even a part where Jemima's character, like she has her sort of British accent going on, and we call it out. And I mean, it's just, for me, it's like, get that out of the way. There's like so many buffers between you and history, and for me, this was trying to create a bridge between us and history. So I feel like that's just one last layer to separate us.
And like you said, when you read the Decameron, which was written so long ago, it's written in a way that it could have been written today.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. It's like so ballsy, and it's 666 or 667 years old, and it's still so fresh.
Molly, and going back to what he was saying about finding characters and finding things that they somehow align with you as an actor. So how does it feel in terms of you being the Mother Superior?
Well, I love playing the Mother Superior, and I like that she's very sweet. I think Jeff sees me as sweet. Is that right?
You are sweet.
You're very sweet.
Oh, I can be real mean too. Yes, it's very flattering, and I just think Jeff is so talented, and I just think a convent is a great place for great female talent. It's like the movies of the 1930s where there are always these amazing parts for women. I think, oh, this was just such a good idea for all these super talented women and men to have a place to play in. It sounds very pretentious.
So when you're doing improv, is like how much improv can you do before you just tucker out? I mean, it's just like
Well, it's not like we're like, hey, let's see what happens. I mean, pretty much if you look at what we did for an outline, it's like this person says this to this person says this to that person. It's saying what they're saying. It's just not doing dialogue lines, because I'd want it to be in their own words when they're saying it. And also the way a process of the way we would work is after like the third take, pretty much, we were locked into the scene. So, I mean, everyone here, the way actors generally work is they have a script. they say their lines, they just keep saying those lines over and over again. So, and then they just keep doing what's called coverage, where you're just getting different angles of the same stuff. And so we basically do that, except we, don't find the exact scene until about the third or fourth take off of like a wider shot. So that's, yeah. So it's not like let's throw it out and see what sticks. I mean, there are little moments like that. It's all just more just to get it in their voices. So it's coming from a place that feels real. And for me, the biggest thing, and John C. Reilly picked up on this because he was a little sort of nervous at first to do something like this, is actors are sometimes, I mean, as good as they are, you are sort of anticipating the next thing that's coming. And in this sort of situation, you're really looking into each other's eyes and responding and being present and actually being there. So it's a real collaboration and a real presence that, I mean, you can get it. I mean, every good actor can pull this off, but there's just something so much more primary and like real and raw when you're acting that way, as opposed to just sort of anticipating what's coming up next.
Kate, what does that feel like? being there?
I love working this way, especially because I think I'm a person that will worry about lines and memorizing, and then when we find it within the scene, it's just so, it's all of a sudden you have it. It's just in you, and it's there's a thing that happens that it just feels so natural, and you're not worried about getting every word right. So it kind of just, like, once we locked in, we were just there, and it was a very freeing experience. I think I really like working in the way that I think it was like maybe day 2. I was like, oh, I know exactly how the rest of the shoot is going to go, as far as like figuring out scenes. I think that first day everybody was like, is this how it's supposed to go?
Well, there's like a stigma with improvisation. Like it's like a term that is like sort of bandied about, and people kind of, it's almost pejorative. It's like, oh, was it improvised? Like, oh, did you guys just like go out there and just like throw stuff? Yeah, like, and it's sort of like does a disservice, because there's such a wide range of what that is. I mean, like Cassavetes is always considered improvisation. I mean,
Good improv is really hard to pull off. If anybody's ever seen a badly improv movie, I mean, those are painful.
Yeah. Yes. So there's a wide range, and like Robert Altman, for instance, he would have a script, and then he would just throw it out and be like, okay, you guys know the story, like, let's go. So I mean, it's such a spectrum that I think the term is, and literally every Q&A you do at Sundance, everyone asks is like, how much of it was improvised? It's like, I don't know what it is, but it's such a thing for people to, it's almost like another thing that kind of gets in the way of like experiencing a movie.
What about in terms of getting the film assembled? It's like, how was there a challenge in terms of kind of getting over any hump about the fact, hey, I'm basing it on this thing from nearly 700 years ago? Was that something that people kind of went, oh?
Okay, so this movie was super weird. I don't know if it was like in August or July. Joe Swanberg, who's the director who actually does a lot of improvised stuff as well, he was staying at my house. We were watching this channel called Dog TV, which is like supposedly for dogs, but it's really for people that are like messed up, I guess. And I told him this idea of mine since college, and he's like, dude, you got to make that movie. He's like, I'll get that money for you tomorrow. And I'm like, great. And then I called up my producer, Liz Destro, who's here, and she said, this is so crazy. One of the investors who invested in my first 2 movies, she's this lady who lives in Tuscany, and her family goes way back and is, they're basically like nobility in Tuscany. They own all these resorts, and they're super connected. And she's been asking the investors for like 4 years to shoot in these medieval villages that she has access to. And they're like, why would we shoot in a medieval village? So when I said, I want to do this like medieval nun movie, like everything clicked, like we didn't need Joe's money. It was like, we just automatically were like making, it was like, maybe this conversation was in July. In September, we were scouting locations in Italy. Like I remember I like sat down with Alison and kind of like pitched her the basic idea of it. And I'm sure like she gets writers and directors being like, hey, so here's this thing, like we're going to make this, it's going to happen. So she's like, great, and then like it actually starts happening. Yeah.
I was like, great. And then, no, it's true though. You pitched me. I would say that if anything, to answer your question, like the text that it was inspired by, I would say was a great advantage, because it was unlike anything. You get pitched I feel like, once a month you're getting pitched like the movie that's like The Big Chill or whatever. Like this was so different and interesting. But it also was one of those things where we sat down and I was like, yeah, that sounds really cool. And if I'm available when you end up getting money to make that, maybe it's going to happen. And then like 3 months later, Jeff was like, so we got the money and can you do it? And I was like, oh, I guess I
It was kind of shocking. And I love watching people's reactions when they're like, so what's the movie? And I'm like, well, it's 14th century nuns. And they're like, what?
A
I'm like,
comedy.
yeah, and it's a comedy, and like these are the people who are in it, and they're like mind's blown.
Also, really funny detail is I met Jemima for lunch, and I guess she had, maybe it was when Girls First came out, she did some quote about someone's like, you're such a great actress, and she's like, I'm not a good actress, trust me. They're like, no, you are. And she's like, no, trust me. Watch me do a 14th century nun movie, and then you'll know for sure I'm not a good actress.
That was like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
I was like, what's a role I could never play? A nun from the 14th century.
So she told me that, and I looked it up. She
Yeah.
actually did say it, and I'm like, all right, you got the part. Perfect.
I was just gonna say, I just had one thought too, but you were right about the improvising. Sometimes I think people have the tendency to think because they're improvising that they have to talk a lot, and sometimes that can be a problem because sometimes the best thing is to just listen and not talk so much. And I think this movie just had a great balance of that, of sometimes the not talking with the talking.
It was so much about the silence. I feel like that's something that took all of us, like the first couple days when we were trying to get a handle on it, and of what Jeff wanted, was the first couple days was all streamlining, where we'd say a ton of stuff and you'd come in and be like, just say the last word of what you said.
Yeah, your ego kind of gets in the way, and you're like, I don't want to just say what was on the paper, you know? I want to like say a whole thing, and then and then you come and you're like, just say where you're going, and then that'll be enough. Yeah.
So in terms of, again, the feedback I've been hearing from people in terms of like, the Monty Python, Mel Brooks, how much of that was figuring into, actually for all of you, in terms of what you were going for, or who your influences were?
For me, not at all.
I didn't think of it once.
Yeah, like I mean, I think that obviously Monty Python is, people are going to say that because it's really, to some extent, reductive, because it's a movie that takes place in the Middle Ages, just like Holy Grail did. So, and it's a comedy, and it's pretty historically accurate. So I think that's like a pretty easy dot to connect. And Mel Brooks, I guess because he did History of the World, which is also historical and it's funny. But I think tonally, this is a completely different sort of thing, and it's not as broad. I'd like to think it's a little bit more grounded, and I think one thing that we try to do, and I think it's almost impossible not to do when you're in Tuscany, is to actually make something beautiful as opposed to just functional and getting an exposure. Like, I think we try to make something that is, even though it's a comedy, it has art to it. And at the same point, I also would say it's not, strictly a comedy. There's a lot of pathos, and it's sort of just, it is what it is. And I think labels and all that kind of stuff is what leads to those sort of conclusions.
Yeah, I feel like most people will come away and label this the medieval nun sex comedy. And it is that, but it's like, it looks stunning. The music is amazing. The way it's cut together, it's an art film, and it's like a beautifully like well-crafted film that just happens to be really funny and weird too.
You could also go through it and not laugh. I mean, if it wasn't for you, if you didn't get the humor, which some people might not, that there is a beautiful story to follow there, and it's fascinating, and it takes turns, and the ending was like, oh my God, it was so
very
stunning.
sweet. There's a real sweetness to the movie, and the way that it came out, I do think so much is unexpected. There are moments where you're definitely laughing, but there are other moments where I think it's kind of intense, or you're just not sure. It's sort of strange, and you're wondering where it's going to go. And then there are moments, that I do find the ending very sweet. I think there's a lot of real moments in there, and it is not as broad. I've never thought of it that way either.
Yeah, I think it's just people, this happened with Joshy too, where it's like, it's a movie that has a lot of sadness to it, but it's easy to just like lump it into bro frat kind of comedy stuff. And so when you go in with those expectations and they're not met, like, it obviously is an adjustment you have to make. And I think the way all art or any film or anything should be viewed is sort of, you have an open mind, you go in, but unfortunately just the way the world is, there's marketing and advertising and all that stuff, so you already are predisposed to thinking it's something before you even see it, and it's either a disappointment or it exceeds your expectations, or there's just so much you're bringing to it, and you're not just sort of experiencing it. So, for instance, Thursday night when we premiere it, that's, no one really knew what was going on, and they just kind of let it wash over them, and it was this whole new experience. Like, that's the way movies should be. Unfortunately, it's just not the way it is. So you end up with having reductive explanations of things before you see them.
A lot of indie films are renowned for their difficult shoots, but shooting in Tuscany sounds pretty fabulous. Was it?
Yeah,
Really
it was great.
difficult though.
It was difficult.
It was beautiful.
And beautiful.
I'm trying to remember now what it was. How old was the building? The building that we shot in, the
It was from the
convent.
1100s.
Yeah,
So
1100.
cold
It
in
was
the stone
freezing.
buildings.
That's all I
Jemima was really cold.
I was really cold, and
The windy roads give us all.
I can't
car
remember.
sickness.
Yeah, a lot of that.
Very ill.
Yeah, a lot of. We ate way too much,
Ate a lot of good.
so we were
food.
always feeling.
That was
Yeah, this doesn't sound
It
awful
was
at
so
all.
hard.
How long of a shoot did you have?
It was 20 days. So, yeah, like I got out there about a month and a half before production started, and then they showed up and we shot it, 5-day weeks for a month.
That's crazy. Were you anxious about making sure that you were going to be able to get what you want in that period? That's
Oh,
really
yeah, I mean,
short.
that's all as a director you're feeling. You're just always worried you're not getting what you want. That's like literally the job description.
Well, I'm getting the wrap up from the team, so thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, you guys.